and welcome back to the Roker Rapport Extra. This week we've got Fulham coming up on Saturday. We're not talking about a defeat from our side, which is definitely a plus and a positive. Hopefully we're talking about a home win from next week, but we'll find out if we think we've got the mettle to get over Fulham this week. Today joining us is Jack from the Fulhamish Pod. How are you doing, Jack? You well?
Yeah, very, very good, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be on the podcast. So thank you very much for having me.
No, not a problem at all. I hope you're going to give us news that makes us a bit more positive. We haven't had too many wins this season.
No, well, I think that I think you're in a position that belies the actual genuine strength of your squad, even if it's not been particularly well suited thus far. But you've picked up a fantastic manager in Chris Coleman, and I think that things can only get better.
Yeah, I hope so. But before we crack on to the big man, got a bit of a sense of deja vu here, if I'm honest with you. I spoke to a Wolves fan last week. We started discussing their last win, or their last game, which was a Birmingham game, a 1-0 win. And you've just beat Birmingham 1-0, leaves you smack bang in the middle of the table in 12th.
Yeah, funny one at the weekend. We dispatched Birmingham as we kind of expected to. They are truly awful. If Fulham were in any sort of raft of form ourselves, you'd have hoped that we'd have put more past that side. But our issue has been putting the ball in the back of the net, and that's what basically came to pass again on Saturday. And if they were any cop at taking penalties, we would have come away with an extremely frustrating 1-1 draw. So we were lucky, and we rode our luck at times. There are hints of last season's Fulham in some sort of respect, in terms of we're still playing a lovely passing football and we're looking to play that kind of game, but we still can't find that sort of clinical edge that gave us, such a good run last year into the playoffs. And we're just lacking something, and no one can quite put their finger on what that is at the moment.
One of the questions I had down here was, I was basically looking through your stats as I tried to do, because I'll be honest with you, and I know this is not the right thing to say, and you might have a similar feeling being just recently relegated, but I've realised how ignorant I am of the non-Premiership teams below. It's like you kind of forget that their style of play. They play like who's a possession-based team, who's a long ball team. And I was kind of looking through Fulham's side, and I've always known you as having good young players, but what stuck out to me was you have the majority of possession in games, which we've actually kind of done ever so slightly better against this season. But would you say that's your style of play then? Is it just all possession based?
Yeah, 100%. Jokanovic has come in, and he had a slow start as Fulham manager, but he really did try and implement this kind of slick passing football that, try and play through opposition presses and try and, keep possession of the football. And there's elements of that kind of, obviously not to the same level. And before I get slaughtered for saying it, it's nowhere near the same level. But that kind of element of the way that City try and play, the way that Liverpool try and play, Napoli is the one that I always say that is the style that I think Fulham tried to emulate most. But, we don't quite have the quality to pull that off in the same kind of manner. And it can be a lovely style of play to watch when it clicks, but it can be extremely frustrating because the Fulham will go backwards rather than lose possession. And it means that when attacks are on and counter-attacks are on, we tend to dither on the ball a fair bit. And, Jokanović's style has brought us a lot of success last year, but this year teams have started to really figure us out. And when teams put a lot of players behind the ball and really look to then hit us on swift counter-attacks, we do look vulnerable. And we've lost against teams that, we lost to Burton Albion right back at the start of the year, and everyone was like, oh, it's a blip. But what they did was they sat back, they waited for us, they soaked up pressure, and they hit us twice on the counter. And that kind of result is what can happen to Fulham and has happened to that kind of possession game when you lack the killer instinct to sort of kill things off. It's all very well and good having 70% possession, but if that means that you have 3 passes in the opposition box, it's really not going anywhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said that as well, because like I was saying before, we do quite well against teams like that who, I can only talk about Coleman in 4 games so far, but he changed the formation on Saturday, and we did definitely sit back against Wolves. I don't know if we'll do that against Fulham. I think he's a little bit more adaptable than Grayson was. Less said about that, the better, I think, with Grayson. But when it came to Coleman, he had a game plan for Saturday, but we were playing against the best side in the league. But I think he definitely wants those 2 defensive midfielders. Obviously, Catamol is suspended, and he had the 3 centre-halves, and he had Catamol and Gibson Holden. This week, potentially, I imagine, I think McNair is back in contention. Yep. So you could look at McNair, who's, as much as he's down as a defensive midfielder, he's actually a little bit better in more advanced positions. So sit back to an extent and then hit a team like Fulham on the break. I'm quietly confident because we've done well against teams like Norwich, Wolves. We haven't done well all season, truth be told, but there's a bit more confidence in the camp with Coleman, and quite nice to hear you saying what you're saying, because it makes me feel a bit more confident about Saturday. But Sunderland or Sunderland, you just never quite know we're going to come up with. But I'm quietly confident, actually. Are you worried about Saturday?
Yeah, I'm massively worried about Saturday. There's so many factors in play, and the title of our podcast is Fulhamish, and someone quite nicely defined that the other day as defying expectations, whether that be positive or negative. So, we went out and sorry to swear on your podcast, but we did go up to St. James's Park last year. And everyone said, oh, that's a throwaway. We'll throw that game away because they've already been promoted. And we went up there and absolutely took the game to them and won 3-1. And it was a great result and a great day and one of those things. But it's also, making sure the next week we're like, oh, we'll come home on a massive high. And we played Wolves, who were last season were a very different outfit to what they are today. Who were struggling, bottom of the table. They hadn't won in 8, and we went there and they took them Scottish, and they completely and utterly dismantled us. So it's very much there are so many factors that feel Fulhamish about this. The whole year without winning at home, that feels Fulhamish. The whole Chris Coleman in the opposite dugout, that feels Fulhamish, and lots of it feels that there are too many things going, oh, you should win this, for me to think that we will.
Yeah, I get that. But like looking at your run of form, I wanted to say that you were kind of out of form, but I've looked at the last 5 games, and it's like draw 1-1, lost 1, and the one game you lost was Brentford when you went down to 10 men. So you're in quite a good run of form as well.
I think our results are belying our run of form a little bit. I think we're not in as good form as we look like, and it's all well and good saying we've got 10 points from 15. But the Brentford game, we were diabolical. We had a good first 30 minutes, but as soon as things started to go wrong, they really went wrong. And Jukanovic's kind of refusal to adapt his tactics when things aren't going his way really does come around to bite us, quite often. And, we beat Birmingham and Millwall 1-0 at home. They were our first 2 clean sheets since January. We concede. We always concede. So that's one thing. Birmingham should have got a point off us, even though we dominated for the entire 90 minutes. They should have scored a penalty, and that would have been that. And Millwall came close. They hit the post in the 83rd minute as well. So it does look good on paper. It's not as rosy as things seem. And I think that a lot of people at Fulham think that these results are a little bit papering over the cracks of the fact that Jokanovic won't adapt his model now that teams have figured us out.
I think that can happen. It's funny how quickly teams kind of figure you out in this league. It's like McGeady, I thought, would really be one of our best players. And obviously he was at Preston last year, and I think it was like 11 assists, 9 goals. And he did start quite well.
Yeah.
In terms of I think he scored some absolute crackers, but you can see teams now are just like, well, he's going to kind of fall over himself. And in terms of teams as a whole, teams figure you out pretty quick, because we started all right. We started with a win against Norwich, and then we drew against Sheff Wed. But then after that, we just went this horrible run, and we're still kind of stuck in it.
Yeah, sort of reeling a bit, I feel. I think the result against Burton Albion is one thing, but to go to Wolves last week, and I watched the highlights when I was trying to prep for our podcast yesterday and talk about Sunderland in a bit more depth, and it very much looked like you had the game under control. It wasn't so much that you were hanging on by the skin of your teeth, or it didn't look like, obviously Wolves had chances. Wolves will always have chances. But it didn't look overtly like they had, massive points of the game. And I think that that's probably a better sign than the win, if I'm perfectly honest. I think that going to Molineux in the form that they're in and giving them a fair game and being like, no, you're not having this all your own way, is probably the kind of defining point. And Coleman teams are always, when he was with us, and you've seen it at Wales, and I'm sure he'll bring this in, are always hard to break down. They always know exactly what they want. And even without Gareth Bale as Wales boss, he overachieved. And it took sort of, a couple of unfortunate circumstances. I'm an Irish fan, so I was delighted, to see those unfortunate circumstances unfold. But it brings it back to the fact that when they were solid and when they had, playing these bigger teams, it was just about keeping the players back, keeping structure well and truly sound, and then building out from there with the kind of like flair, 1 or 2 flair players that you can, then unleash. And I think that's probably what he'll look to implement, especially with someone who's obviously in so much form as Lewis Grabban is up front.
Yeah, and it's funny with Grabban. Grabban's a funny one though, because he's got, I think it's like 11 goals. He's linked with a move away in January. Well, not a move away, he's on loan to us, so I guess it's like in. But it's funny, he's not overly loved by any of us, but he just seems to be in the right place at the right time. And I personally think we'd lose a lot. There's some people who are like, oh, we wouldn't miss too much. He's this, he's that, but we would, I think. But the way Coleman plays, I've kind of got a feeling, because we were talking about like players that he's brought in over his time, Coleman, at different clubs. And at Wales, he had Sam Sam Vokes. And at Fulham, you brought up like a pure, like, I mean, early 2000s player, but to me, it was like a total 90s name, Brian McBride.
Yeah.
And it's all about having a big man up top. And we've got Vaughan, who, funnily enough, scored in like his Coleman's second game, but he hasn't done well. He really hasn't done well. Whereas Graben's not really the kind of Coleman type. So there is a feeling that as much as Graben might be on the way out, that I think he may be looking at Gary Medine, apparently. Did he, because when Coleman was a manager at Fulham, we're talking a while ago now, and there's been a big change. Did he play the 3-5-2 formation that he's kind of known for now?
No, I can never remember Fulham playing with three at the back. Never, ever, really. Until the end of last season, start of this season, we tried it for a bit and it still didn't really work for us. He definitely was a 4-4-2 man, that kind of, or a 4-4-1-1 even. McBride led the line and there was always a little man buzzing about him. But it was a very like solid, practical, pragmatic team. And that was his style back then. I think he obviously adapted it into that 3-5-2, but with the two holding midfielders, it does make that kind of solid middle ground that you don't really mess with. And I feel like it's a natural kind of progression for Coleman to move into that kind of formation. I think about just touching back on Graben, the point I'd make is we're a team who create quite a lot, and we're very good at looking to find holes and making space, and we put a lot of balls across the box. We lack that player that's there at the right place at the right time, and it's funny how much you don't realise who they are until they're gone. And we had Chris Martin on loan from Derby last season, and he was pretty much universally maligned by the Fulham fans because he basically said he wanted to go back to Steve McLaren when Derby got McLaren back in, and there was all sorts of standoffs and scandal, and he left out the side, and then all the players said it was okay, and then he came back, bloody blah. But basically the fans never took back to him. And although people didn't like him, he was so important as the focal point of that attack because he was the kind of holding player which it all kind of floated around. And when the ball got dragged back into the middle, he was usually the one there either to score or to lay it off. And he got 10, 11 goals last season, I think, for us in all comps. And you know what? That's not brilliant for a striker, but it's more than anyone's even close to this year. And, we had those kind of players firing and we had that kind of rotation going. And you really do need a focal point striker who knows where to be at what time. And that's what we're lacking.
And it's interesting you said that as well, because I was looking through, like like I was saying before, I looked through the stats, I looked through the players that I thought could cause us problems. And off the top of my head, it was like Ryan Sessegnon.
Yeah.
But as I was reading through the statistics, I noticed that the goals, if anything, are shared between the midfield, like 4 each, like Sessegnon 4, Norwood 4. There was no striker that had scored 5 or 6.
So we've started playing with a false 9, and Stefan Johansson, who was his ex-Celtic and the Norwegian captain, has been playing in the false 9, which is a bit nuts considering he spent £10 million on strikers in the summer. We brought in Rui Font from Braga, who's a technically very gifted player, but he's not an out-and-out striker. He's a more withdrawn forward, and he sort of looks to drop in and create rather than put the ball in the back of the net. We also brought Abubakar Kamara, who's a bit of, I'd say rough diamond, but that would be unfair on the diamond. He's very raw. He does have a certain something about him, but his touch is terrible and his knowledge and his sort of awareness of the game is awful. He's going to be quite a good player, I think. He has elements of that kind of, he's very strong, he's very quick, and he's very direct, but he's just not very good at shooting, and he's often offside. And sort of when he touches the ball, it sort of bounds off 5 yards, and you're like, oh God, he usually gets it back because he's rapid. But he's one of those players that you're like, oh, it's going to go back to the halfway line. He's going to run around in a massive loop now and go round to the other side of the pitch. What we could really do with is someone, almost like a Defoe type player who just loiters in the box, because we have Ojo and Sessegnon on the flanks, or Ojo and Cabana, and they're all really good, tricky players who can beat a man, and the ball gets flashed into the box a lot. A lot of our attacks come down. Our two wingers play more like inside forwards, if you want to use an old school term for it. And they cut inside, and it allows our two fullbacks to absolutely bomb one. And on the right, we have Ryan Fredericks, ex-Spurs, and he's joined us a couple of years back. And at first, we were like, this man's insane. He's just really fast. He doesn't really do anything. And he's really good at getting to the byline. He's not very good at crossing, but when you get to the byline, all you have to do is drill it in. And, you need someone
very much
to sort of get to the right place. And we just don't have that player that puts the ball in the back of the net. is basically the issue that Fulham have.
It's interesting you say that as well, because sometimes I think the one thing we miss is someone to put their foot on the ball and try that through ball and be good in that, the third quarter of the pitch. And we don't have that. We've got Gibson, McNair, Cattermole, Honeyman, and all relatively, apart from Honeyman, kind of defensive minded. And George Honeyman, bless, I feel so bad saying this because he tries hard, but the quality is not quite there. Yeah. Grabbing, as much as he's probably underappreciated by our fan base, I think, on the whole, like he puts the ball in the back of the net when it's there. And I think it'd be interesting to see if he does stay and he doesn't go in January, how Coleman moves forward with the centre forwards that he has. Does he stick with Graben, or does he go for a big centre forward and try and change the way we play?
It wouldn't surprise me to see Coleman going for someone like Medine. We had Bolton at the Cottage 3-4 weeks ago, and he does do a job. That's exactly what he does. He does a job. He distracts defenders, and Sammy Amiobi runs amok because everyone's tied up with looking after Medine. And so in that respect, I don't think it'd be a bad signing to go alongside Graben. I think you'd struggle with just having Medine because his kind of hold-up play and knockdown work is so based on having someone to sort of run around beside him. I'm interested in what you think of, and if you don't mind me asking about Cattermole. And I've seen some of his performances this season, and he looks a shadow of the man he once was. I followed Sunderland not too closely, but back when I was at university, I went to Durham, so I around the area, and a lot of the people I was with, and that were Sunderland fans. We used to go to games occasionally, and I remember Cattermole being this kind of iconic figure that was the heart and soul of everything. And even if he had
totally
play points, he had he was always fire and fury and blood, and all of those things seem to be missing from him this season. And I've seen a lot of people saying that the red card might be a bad thing for us, which is mad to think of, considering what kind of esteem that I held Cattermole in before this season.
Cattermole's been slowly, like sort of September, October time, people are like, well, Cattermole's not really performing, and it's got to December now when everyone's, I think, almost universally like, what has happened to him? He just, and there's no other way for me to put it, but Cattermole looks like he's had one injury too many and he's lost it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just because he's stagnated. He's been here since 2009, I think. So we're talking nearly a decade. And realistically, as much as he's a bit of a cult hero, I'll be honest, I love Lee Cattermole, previously Cattermole. Right now, I'm delighted he's out of the game. In fact, I'll touch on this. Where we've really struggled this year is that our experienced players have let us down. Cattermole, maybe it's unfair to say O'Shea, so I'll say Kone, but the ones that you'd expect to kind of be like Mantle and kind of ushering these younger players through, and it's people like Honeyman and people like Lyndon Gooch. You've kind of like got the balls to just have a go, and there's almost like a want from the fan base to have the younger people in the side because at least they're showing bollocks, for want of a better word.
Yeah, no, I was surprised that Gooch hasn't been given more of an opportunity. I've seen him play in the US and what he was doing over there, and that's kind of part of what the job is I do. But I've been watching him, for a couple of years, and he's always seemed like he puts in a fair shift, and he has a little bit, he's not, I wouldn't say he's a creative powerhouse, but he knows how to drive the ball forwards, and I'm surprised he hasn't had more of a look in. I was going to touch on the same kind of thing and talk about it a little bit, because for me, I keep an eye on John O'Shea and Aidan McGeady for international reasons, but they're just, neither of them seem to be hitting the targets. Actually, I regress a little bit because John O'Shea seemed to have an excellent game at the weekend, and I've heard that from more than one quarter, shall we say. But Aidan McGeady, every time he comes on for the Republic, looks knackered. He looks finished. And I hate to say it because he was one of my favourite players. I followed him, from Celtic all the way out to Moscow and watched him out there and watched him in the Champions League. And remember being like, oh, amazing, these Irish fellas just, out there in Moscow doing fair bits. So it was one of those things that I always think. And he was okay at Preston, but even there, his kind of output belied the fact that he occasionally was absolutely anonymous during games. And he'd get like 2 goals and an assist in one game, and then he'd go missing for 2 weeks, and then he'd pop up again with another goal and assist, and everyone would be like, oh, look at McGeady's totals. He's looking like he really is back. And I'd be like, well, it's one thing, but actually, if you look at where he's got those kind of assists and goals, it's where Preston were already winning 2-0, and he'd managed to get the third and assist the fourth. And it really does feel like he's kind of, his legs are gone, I think. He's always one step over too many. And if he just released the ball a little bit more, I feel like he'd be, twice the player, because I don't think he's realised yet that his pace isn't quite what it was to kind of tear past a player. And it's all good beating one player, but you're never going to get past the second if you don't have the acceleration.
And it's funny, he's we're 4 games into the Coleman era, and he's already been dropped. And I don't know, a lot of people kind of said, oh, well, that's the formation and that's it, that's him changing. But I don't see McGeady having, and maybe it's too early to say, but I don't think McGeady's going to be a Coleman man. I don't think that. I think he was good under Grayson. He was probably our best player under Grayson. And then Grayson left. It's one step over too many, and it's lack of quality and end product.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, Suits, it very much feels like that from where I'm standing. And I'm sure, as someone that sees it week in, week out, it's refreshing to know that the kind of synopsis from afar is actually what's going on.
Yeah, and it really is. He just looks miserable. And I don't know if it's just he came here for Grayson.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to concentrate on the positives.
Yeah, definitely.
Had lots of negatives. But one thing I have to ask.
Oh, yeah.
What's your thoughts on Chris Coleman as a whole? What's your thoughts from an inside but technically an outside perspective?
What I would say about Coleman is that he's always come across as a genuinely excellent person. That would be my first comment. And I think the basis for anything else has to sort of stem from that, if you will. He's always come across as a genuine great guy. And someone who deeply cares about football, and someone who has, a knowledge of not so much his own limitations, but he always is able to look at his squad and go, okay, I'm not going to be able to play, attacking fast-paced football at 100 miles an hour with the players I've got. And you saw that with Wales. He was able to kind of develop that squad from a very much a basic unit that didn't necessarily do much when they had the ball to a very, very solid back three, 2 wing backs that had the ability and tenacity to get forward, and they all just worked for each other. And what I think he'll do is he'll rebuild that kind of solid vibe first, and then hopefully look to start to pick teams off on the counter. And then from there, and from January, when he can bring in a few more of his own players, I'd be surprised if you didn't bring in that kind of flying wing back who with a massive work rate. And I know that your fullbacks have actually been some of the better players this year from what I've read and seen. But I really, I think Oviedo is a great player, and I know he's been quite widely lauded for his efforts, shall we say. I think you might end up seeing him in a more central role. If I'm honest, I always thought he could do that for Everton, and I think I wouldn't be surprised to see him in a midfield 3, especially if what you were saying earlier was you were lacking was creativity. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he was moving into that 3 to make way for a kind of like up and down the wing all the time left back. And so I think that what you'll see develop from Coleman, and what we definitely saw at the Cottage, was like a very tight-knit group that worked very, very hard for each other and were always able to put in that extra kind of 10 minutes at the end when all else seemed lost. We had a lot of, if I remember correctly, we had a lot of like last-minute equalisers and sort of never say die attitude. We were quite swashbuckling in that kind of sense, but it was all very much based on a solid middle that didn't sort of wilt under pressure.
Yeah, and I mean, from our perspective as a fan base, that's kind of what we like. That is reminiscent of the Roy Keane era. We need back that little bit of metal. I just hope it hasn't been left too late for him to save us, because we're not quite adrift yet, but we could be. I wrote off Wolves at the weekend, and I think if he gets the home form right, and I don't mean win every game, if he can win like 1 in 2, 1 in 3, then we'll soon shoot up that league. And I have confidence in Coleman. I really genuinely do.
I think a good run of results in this league can do wonders for you. And actually, if you look at us last year, I know it's not quite the same kind of point of the division or whatever, but we were cut adrift in 10th, I suppose, from in that playoff hunt, if you will. And we were 10 points, I think 7 points at January, but at 1 point, 10 points behind 6th place. And we just went on a bit of a rampage. And when it really clicked, it clicked. And I think that Coleman's the kind of man that might not inspire, 7 wins on the trot, but he might inspire 3 wins, 3 draws, and, 1, unlucky loss in the middle of it. That not enough to like derail confidence as such. Going away to Leeds and losing 1-0 is by no means a bad result. They're a good side, and it pains me to say that because I don't like Leeds. It really,
same.
It's really one of those things that if you go and get that kind of run of form going, then it can be such a positive in terms of the division. And it's really easy to, I wouldn't say it's easy to pick up points. It's never easy to pick up points in this division. But if you do get a run of form going, it is easy to move up places to an extent. Obviously, you're not going to suddenly become sixth, but I think if you have the right kind of structure in there in terms of Coleman and Simons, and he's another one, who didn't do brilliantly for Fulham, but his passion and verve for the game is very much in evidence. And I think that you'd struggle to find a better manager at the level that we're currently in.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I think that we're warranted a good thing, I hope. Which brings me on to the final two questions. Do you have a prediction for Saturday? But before the prediction, that anyone you're worried about? I have a feeling I know who you're going to say, but anyway.
Well, it's a funny one. I mean, we've obviously touched on Graben and that kind of what he brings to the side and how useful he is in the box. But one of the things we're actually terrible at is defending set pieces. And we're just anything sort of long and lumped into the box, we're not very good at. So I think that you might be surprised. I don't know if he'll play, but if you can get the balls into the box for Lamine Kone in the weekend, he would. This is the kind of game that he could turn things around in, because our ability to defend high balls from that kind of big hulking figure is absolutely terrible. So I'm a little bit wary of set pieces. So for that reason, I'd say Kone. But obviously, Graben is for me the danger man, and especially the way we play. We often have 7-8 men in the opposition half. And I think, the pace and power, especially if we're left 2-on-2 with our two centre-backs, who are both, good players in their own right, but will struggle with his kind of pace and quality, because I think that's the big one. In terms of predictions, I think it's going to go one of two ways. I think if we can score early, I've been to the Stadium Light more than once, and I know what it's like as a ground, and I know how intimidating it can be to opposition teams if the atmosphere gets going. But I can also see that going the other way, and especially if things aren't going well, and obviously they haven't been going well at home. If Fulham can get an early goal and get our noses in front and get control of the ball and look like we're really dominating the game, I think we could come on and win. Not comfortably, we never win that comfortably, if I'm perfectly honest with you, but I could see a 2-0.
Yeah.
But I think if you can weather an early storm and we get frustrated and we're just playing that weird possession game, I can see us getting caught out as well and losing by one on a kind of sort of either a set piece or a breakaway goal. I think they would be I think either Fulham score early and we go on and dominate the game, or we don't score early and we get picked off on the break.
Yeah, I see. It's tough to call. I fancy us to win. I don't know why. The beauty about the one player well, it's not the beauty for us, but Kone's injured.
Oh, he is.
For quite a while.
Oh,
so
wow.
We have our three centre-halves are Tyus Browning, John O'Shea and Mark Wilson. So since you're worried about centre-half, by default, can I say you're worried about John O'Shea just for shits and giggles?
Yeah, of course you can. You can. I didn't realise Kone was injured for so long.
Yeah. Allegedly so.
Yeah, I saw. Well, I mean, I saw him in his pomp and ceremony when he first came, and everyone was obviously so excited. So he did start this season, did he not?
Yeah, he got injured about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Okay, all right. I feel more confident. I'm pretty sure I saw him play this season, but I didn't realise that. I mean, the point stands as such. It wasn't necessarily him. It's just any sort of aerial threat from a set piece is likely to trouble us. And if I think that obviously we're lucky that Seb Larsson no longer is in the ranks to worry us with those, because I remember playing you before and just being constantly worried by Seb Larsson standing over the ball. But it is one of those where I don't know who now takes those, but I would be worried no matter who it was at this point in the way we look to defend under crosses.
So Oviedo these days. Oviedo is actually dynamite on corners. He scored from a direct corner this year, but that was kind of the goalkeeper's fault.
Was this against Millwall?
Brentford. It was Brentford. The Millwall game was a totally different kettle of fish. That was all 4 goals were ridiculous. Yeah, that's painful to remember.
Potentially the most entertaining 2 minutes of football that have ever been by Sports Highlights. I'm sure less so for both of you, but for everyone else, it was one of those. Any goal against Brentford's a good goal for me, so I'll take that.
Yeah. Good, man. Well, Jack, thanks for coming on, mate. It's been a good crack. You make me feel a bit more confident, which I don't know if that's you being a pessimistic bugger or not, but I hope you enjoy the season after Saturday.
Yeah, same to you. I'm very much a cookie fan, and I hope that he does. I hope he does keep you up, and I hope that everything does start to turn around at the Stadium a lot.
I'm going to say nothing, but I hope so.
I hope so.
Cheers, Jack.
Thank you for having me on. Take care.
Not a problem, my friend. Have a good day.